Over 50 million people have early voted so far. So what does that mean? So this is the consensus map. It's pretty much what most polls agree on, give or take. I think this is a pretty fair assessment. To give you an idea though, if the results were decided purely on polling with no toss-ups and no swing states, then the election would actually look like this, with Trump winning 287 to Harris 251. However, we do know that polling doesn't really matter. So let's take a look at the early voting just to get an idea of where we're at. The battleground states being Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. A couple things to note in early voting is that so far, 44% of the early voting have been the Democrats, 30% have been Republicans, and that 51% women and 43% men. 6% he, her, she, him, Zer. I don't know what that is. And the age, it actually skews much older. So it's the older generation that has been going and voting. It is the Gen Z and younger generations, 18 to 29-year-olds that have only voted 11%. 18 to 29-year-olds are only 11% of the early voting. Almost 75% of the early voting is over 40 years old. Also something to note, typically the older generation is more Republican and the younger generations are more Democrat. So if people are expecting a huge red wave to come in on election day, I think a lot of those votes have actually already been cast. And I think we're going to be waiting for a lot of younger votes. So far, we have about 50 million plus people have voted early. We expect about 70 million people to early vote and another 70 million will vote on election day. And I don't think we can assume that all the votes that come in on election day will be cast for Trump. The older generation have already voted and the votes that we're waiting for tend to be younger. If we look at Nevada, the vote is pretty split, and with Trump with a 4-point lead, with registered Republicans in the lead. So I think it's pretty safe to say here that Nevada will go to Trump. If we look at Arizona, it's same. Although I said the other day that I think Trump may lose Arizona, I think I may take that back based on the early voting. And it looks like the Republicans definitely have a lead here in Arizona also. So we'll give that to Trump. Next, let's look at Pennsylvania. So far in Pennsylvania, 58% of the early voting has been for the Democrats, 32% have been for the Republicans. The mail-in ballots fall in that line as well. I think that's maybe too big of a gap. I'm not exactly sure. For the sake of predictions, considering how large that gap is, and knowing that the older generation tends to be more conservative and the 18 to 29 is only 8%, 30 to 39 is 8%, and 40-49 is only 9% of the vote, that it's such a small amount that have voted early that a lot of these younger voters will be voting on election day and they will skew more Kamala. I think this gap may be too large to overcome. We'll give that one to Kamala. North Carolina is a little tricky because a third of the voting bloc is registered as independent or no party affiliation, which makes it very difficult to track. You see that it's pretty even. And if things are even here, knowing that it's the deep South and knowing that I have a lot of ears on the ground in North Carolina, I think we give that to North Carolina also. Which makes it really tricky here because the last video I gave Wisconsin and Michigan to Kamala. But if I were to do that again, then actually that is enough to get her to 270. If Trump were to pick up both, then he would be at 270. Let's check out Georgia first, actually. Because last video I said all roads lead through Georgia. But I think actually Georgia is starting to go towards Trump now. If you look at the early voting for Georgia, Trump has been dominating in the mail-in and early votes. Actually, only 340,000 people have done mail-in ballots, and most of those are in at this point. Over the 3 million people that have voted early, Trump has the lead. I think that he can hold that lead because going into election day, that should be a large enough lead to help him win. We're going to give Georgia to Trump now. Although Georgia is very close, and you know that because President Trump has done, I think, 3 or 4 rallies in the last 2.5 weeks in Georgia, as well as J.D. Vance showing up to Georgia several times. And Kamala Harris has also done 2 or 3 rallies in Georgia in that same time period. Obama was here 2 days ago, and Kamala is coming back on Saturday. So Georgia is probably extremely close. I think with the 16 electoral votes, both sides absolutely want to win it. I also think it's a huge statement piece because Georgia was such a controversial state 4 years ago that both sides just want to win it. I think Georgia is really important, but I'm going to give it to Trump. But even if I give Georgia to Trump, it doesn't take him to the 270 that he needs in order to win the election. So even if we gave Georgia to Trump, he would have to win either Wisconsin or Michigan. For Kamala to win, she would have to win Wisconsin and Michigan, and that would get her to 270. If they split Wisconsin and Michigan, then Trump would win the election. If he wins both, it will be a shellacking. Let's see if the early voting gives us a clue. So right now in the early voting, Kamala definitely has a lead because 35% have been registered Democrats of the 1 million votes cast. 23% have been Republicans. We're still waiting for a lot of mail-in ballots, and that is still heavily favored in the Democrat decision. But 42% of people are either unregistered or no party affiliated. So this could go either way. But considering that she has a pretty hefty lead, I mean, 13 points, it's really hard to say because you don't know who this 40, it's such a big gap here in this 42%. So Wisconsin, we leave it the way it is. And if we check in on Michigan, it's still a little closer. Actually, Kamala, Democrats have 47% of the votes in so far, and 42% of the votes go Republican. But that 11% right here, it still makes it a little bit tricky because that's still a large enough percentage to cover any gap. If you consider that if it just goes slightly more right, then this can close really quickly. 2.1 million mail-in and early in-person votes are cast, but 2.3 mail-in ballots were requested, meaning there's a lot of Democrat mail-in ballots still out there. If that were to go to Kamala, then even in this scenario, Wisconsin makes the difference. If Kamala were to win Georgia, then it's over. If Trump wins Wisconsin, it's over. Let's go back to where we would be if the polling were accurate and the race were to end based on just the polling alone. Looks like the polling has Trump winning Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, with losing Wisconsin and Michigan. But based on this map alone, if Kamala were to just flip Pennsylvania, that's enough to get her to win. If he holds on to the lead, Trump wins. There's so many different ways that this can play out. I think all this proves is that if you haven't voted yet, you have to go vote. It could literally go any direction. Don't think, oh, we're ahead, so I'm going to sit this one out. Oh, it's cold outside. I'm tired. Maybe I got something else to do. There's no excuse. It's so close. It's razor thin. 100 different scenarios in which way this can go. It could literally come down to one vote in Pennsylvania. It could literally come down to one vote in Georgia. So many different ways that this can play out. Gotta go vote.